This is the Late Round Podcast with your host, JJ Zacharisa.
What's up, everyone? It's JJ Zacharisa, and this episode 714 of the Late Round Fantasy Football Podcast, sponsored by FanDuel. As always, thanks for tuning in. Before getting into this week's trends, I want to remind you about the mobile gaming app FanDuel Face-Off. FanDuel Face-Off is where you compete in quick, fun games against other real people for real cash. It has all sorts of games that you're familiar with, like Home Run Derby, Wheel of Fortune, puzzle and strategy games, and there's more on the way. Contests are action-packed and last between 2 to 5 minutes, so you can play on your couch, waiting in line, during a commercial break, wherever, and on your schedule. Plus, you can practice for free anytime. Whether it be head-to-head, multiplayer, or larger tournaments, FanDuel Face-Off has something for you. Plus, in most contests, you'll be matched against players of similar skill level, so you're never totally overmatched even as a beginner. Face-Off is also tied to your FanDuel account and wallet, so you can easily use your daily fantasy funds or sportsbook winnings in the app. Visit FanDuel.com/faceoff or download the FanDuel Face-Off app in the Apple App Store today to get in the game. Age and location restrictions apply, void where prohibited. See FanDuel.com/faceoff-terms for terms and conditions. Trend 1 this week is about Cordarrelle Patterson. He's been back for 3 games now since that injury, and 2 of those 3 games have resulted in pretty bad fantasy totals. And really, the only reason he scored 18 PPR points in his return was because he found the end zone twice. But if you want some optimism, in Week 11, Patterson saw 53% of Atlanta's running back rushes. That's his highest mark since Week 3. And he had an 11% target share, which was just the second time he hit a double-digit percentage target share this season. Tyler Algier did play more snaps this past weekend, but it's at least a somewhat positive sign for Patterson. I made reference to Terry McLaurin on yesterday's 15 Transaction Show when talking about Curtis Samuel. I just want to share with you guys how much better he's been with Taylor Heinicke. Heinicke took over the offense in Week 7. In Washington's 5 games with Heinicke, McLaurin's averaged 15.2 PPR points per game and a target share per game over 32%. That's crazy. Before Heinicke, he was averaging 4 fewer fantasy points per game. His target share per game was 16.5%. Remember, with Heinicke, it's 32%. There's no doubt that the quarterback switch has helped Terry McLaurin. Miles Sanders has been pretty rough in fantasy over the last couple of weeks. He scored about 11 total PPR points against Washington and Indianapolis. He's now seen just 3 targets over his last 5 games, and he hasn't seen more than 1 target in a game since Week 5. That's something that we knew would sort of be the case for Miles Sanders, but it's still a problem nonetheless. The Eagles actually have the lowest running back target share in the NFL. Philly doesn't have amazing matchups upcoming either. Sanders can be serviceable, but it's clear that he won't hit a reasonable ceiling without a touchdown. The Jets said they were going to use Elijah Moore a little bit more in the slot, and that's what they did in Week 11. He played almost 70% of his snaps from that area of the field, according to Next Gen Stats, when his season-long number up until that point was about 30%. And that resulted in a 20% target share, just the second time this season he's hit a 20% target share. The issue is that he's still playing behind Denzel Mims, and that's going to be Corey Davis when Davis returns. He's probably not all of a sudden going to become someone that you can rely on in fantasy football, especially with how Zach Wilson's playing. People are upset about Christian McCaffrey's workload with the 49ers, and I get that to some degree. The 49ers blew out the Cardinals on Monday night, so we saw backups in that game in the early parts of the fourth quarter, and that resulted in just a 33% running back rush share for Christian McCaffrey. But in PPR formats, he's still more than fine. He's great. Imagine a world where the 49ers are in a more competitive environment, and he's seeing more looks on the ground as a result, because that's going to end up happening. What's important is that his target shares have been incredibly good since joining San Francisco. Over the last 3 weeks, he's averaging a target share per game of almost 27%. He's been a top 12 running back in PPR leagues in each of his last 3. I would not be panicking if I had Christian McCaffrey. Now, speaking of the 49ers, don't sleep on Jimmy Garoppolo as a strong rest of season option. He's actually been pretty good over the last month and a half. He's averaging 18.4 fantasy points per game since week 4, and that number's been 19.7 where Christian McCaffrey's played significant snaps. And the thing is, according to my adjusted fantasy points allowed numbers, the 49ers have the 7th best schedule rest of season. They have the 6th best one in the fantasy playoffs. I actually think that you could consider Jimmy G as a low-end QB1 in fantasy. At the very least, he's a high-end QB2. The Broncos' offense is just so broken. On the season, no team has fewer offensive touchdowns than the Russell Wilson-led Broncos. I never thought that I would be saying that. They're actually 2 touchdowns behind the next closest team. Jamal Williams himself has 1 fewer touchdown this year than the Denver Broncos offense. And that's having an obvious effect on everyone. Courtland Sutton has hit a 25% target share over his last 2 games. That's great usage. But he's ranked as a wide receiver 3 in both of those contests because he can't find the freaking end zone. Russell Wilson this past week became the first quarterback this season to face the Raiders and not have a passing touchdown. This trend is to just say that the Denver offense is totally broken. And even when players are seeing volume, like Latavius Murray is about to see, it's hard to be totally excited. The Cardinals were without Zach Ertz for the first time on Monday night, and rookie Trey McBride ended up seeing pretty strong usage. He ran 32 routes when DeAndre Hopkins was at 35, just for some context, and he saw 4 targets. They weren't great targets, but he at least had relatively decent usage. If you're in desperate need of a tight end, which many of you are, I wouldn't be surprised if he gives us some decent performances through the end of the year. Arizona's got a decent schedule for tight ends from here on out when looking at my adjusted fantasy points allowed method. Sky Moore got a little bit more run on Sunday night with all the injuries of the Chiefs wide receivers. Juju Smith-Schuster and Mecole Hardman were out, and then Kadarius Toney was hurt early in that game. Moore ended up seeing 6 targets. That was the second highest mark on the team, behind only Travis Kelce. The problem is that he ran only 14 routes. For some perspective, Justin Watson ran 34. The hope would be that this high targets per route run rate gets Sky Moore on the field a little bit more. But do know that his actual usage, them throwing him on the field, it was unfortunately not as good as the box score indicated. The last trend this week is about the Steelers and Pat Freiermuth. He saw an even higher percentage of his snaps from the slot in Week 11 than he did in Week 10. In Week 10 without Chase Claypool, Freiermuth played 39.4% of his snaps from the slot. In Week 11, that number jumped all the way up to 52%. He's now seen target shares of 27% and 32% over his last 2 games. Those are incredible numbers for a tight end. And both of those games were without Chase Claypool. That's it for today's show, though. Thanks to all of you for listening. If you get subscribed to the Late Round Fantasy Football Podcast, make sure you are by searching for it pretty much anywhere podcasts can be found. And don't forget to follow me on Twitter, @LateRoundQB. Remember to check out LateRound.com. You can join the Patreon and have access to an awesome and active Discord community. You can join the free newsletter, and there's more on there too. Check it out, LateRound.com. Thanks for listening, everyone. I'll talk to you tomorrow.